Okay, good afternoon, Professor Chattopadhyay. Professor Chattopadhyay is professor of marketing. He has the GlaxoSmithKline Chair Professor of Corporate Innovation and Marketing Area Chair of INSEAD, now in Singapore. He holds a PhD from the University of Florida, a PGDM from the Indian Institute of Management, and a BSc with honors, a degree from Jodhpur University in India. Professor Chattopadhyay has been teaching courses on branding, marketing strategy, communication strategy, consumer behavior, marketing in emerging economies, and international marketing in all around the world, so to speak. He is on the advisory board of several companies and is a consultant of multinational firms. He's also a researcher. Is an editor of Journal of Marketing and is on editorial board of several other journals. He has written, let's say, lots of papers and articles in different journals and also a book. Professor, I understand that we are about 7 hours away, 12,000 kilometers from each other. Okay, that's the beauty of technology, so to speak. I had the pleasure of attending your address to the KSP Summit in Oporto, I think in 2016, around that, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Which I really appreciated, and therefore I remember to invite you to this talk, and I thank you very much for your sympathy in having accepted it. So just to begin, Professor, you wrote the book, The New Emerging Market Multinationals, 4 Strategies for Disrupting Markets and Building Brands, around 2012. After the, let's say, the growth and all the changes we have been having in the markets, if you had to rewrite it or if you had to make another edition of the book, what would you change?
So I think essentially the mix of companies might change. So for instance, when we were doing the research for this book, Xiaomi didn't exist. It's a $40 billion company today. So we would have tried to include companies like Xiaomi, which are very interesting and exciting companies. And in fact, we've just finished writing a case on Xiaomi and are writing a piece for the Harvard Business Review on how they've been able to, for a company founded in 2010, to have closed 2020 with almost $38 billion in revenues and have become the world's largest IoT player is a formidable achievement. And so we would have looked at companies like that, which are which would be interesting to study if we were to be writing or revising the book today.
Yeah, sure. Okay. On your book, and I think it's a reality, you talk about companies from less developed countries challenging larger companies from the old world. Can you characterize the new winning mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different in different countries, but let me use India and China as 2 examples. So in India, when in 1991, when India was basically bankrupt, and we had to ship gold to the Bank of England to get hard currency to meet our debt requirements. That's when the Indian economy opened for the first time since independence. And there was a great, fear in the minds of the domestic players that they would get wiped out because the Indian government had protected these companies for that time, whatever, from 1947 to 1991, under the so-called infant industry argument. And they felt they couldn't, they would die because now with the new rules, foreign competition was going to come roaring in. And the competition did come roaring in, but then they realized that they had survived. and they were doing quite well. And a couple of things that were particularly sort of, I think, mindset shifting was in 2000, March 2000, Tata Tea bought Tetley. So I'll call it Empire Strikes Back, because this was an Indian company buying a British company.
Yeah.
And, you know, as far as deal sizes go, it was nothing. It was 273 million pounds sterling, which was spent by Tata Tea to buy Tetley. But, you know, Tata Tea was a small company at that time, and it bought a company, you know, 2 or 3 times its size. And they suddenly went from being a bit player in the tea business to being the second largest player after Unilever. And this kind of opened the eyes of Indian industry in some sense, saying, wow, look at the possibilities. We can actually go out there and successfully acquire global firms. I mean, Tetley was a global brand of tea. And, you know, here was an Indian company that had bought it. The other thing was that Mahindra and Mahindra launched a SUV, which they produced in 18 months for, I think, development cost of $100 million, which was 1/10 the price of what Detroit would take, and half the time. And this brand was highly successful. This SUV was highly successful in the Indian market. It was called the Scorpio. And it then was rolled out to Africa, to southern Italy. I think you would probably have it in Portugal, is my best guess. And they rolled it out to Latin America. You know, I mean, we were in Chile in 2018, and you know, we saw the Scorpio everywhere. And then they've, you know, introduced a bunch of more sophisticated models since then. And this, I think, gave this idea that we can do it. And finally, the opportunity has arrived for us to be able to do it. And they grabbed it with both hands. So it was a can-do mentality, right? Which they'd never had before. In China, it was a little different, because in China, it was more about a very strong nationalistic feeling that it's our turn, that the Middle Kingdom would rule the earth again. And they actually used the phrase, our turn. And I think this was a combination of the rise of China, you know, the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and then, of course, Mr. Xi kind of stirred the pot, right? And continues to stir it. So, so the collective of that led to a feeling that it was stated as it's our turn, and they work crazy hours, right? I mean, it's not a issue of there's a Saturday or a Sunday. I mean, I have to give you a story that one of the people we interviewed, he said, you know, my boss might call me at 2 a.m. because he has an idea. And he expects me to actually answer the phone and to think about the idea because he's calling me. And let me contrast it with when TCS acquired Thomson in France, the chairman of TCS flew to Paris to meet with the ExCom, and he arrived on a Saturday. He tried to call his ExCom members, but nobody answered the phone. And you know, because it's just a different world. And so it's this thing that we can do it, and then, you know, it doesn't really matter whether it's Saturday, Monday, Friday night at 3 a.m., it's all fine. And then the third thing, as a result of this, you have this thing that, you know, expat packages are not like the Western company expat packages. So for many companies, if you're from IBM and you get sent to Ghana or Nigeria, first of all, you may say, "Are you kidding?" And secondly, you get, a big fat package. But with, let's say, a company like Infosys, they would pay you your Indian salary, and then they would give you your a cost of living amount for there. And if you're posted to UK, you probably will earn less than the UK employed employees. So it's a very different world. And I think the result of that is that you have people who are dedicated because they think it's, we have an opportunity. They're both old cultures with a lot of pride at stake, and that we're going to get there. And then they're willing to work hard. They are willing to work hard for less. They're willing to work long hours. Nobody thinks of a 9-to-5 job, whether it's India or it's China. And so that just changes the way of doing business.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a different mentality, and it's really quite different from Europe and from the Western countries. Okay, but not so many years ago, countries like Eastern Asia were only low-cost producers, acting as producers of high-standard brands. Nowadays, most of these countries like China, South Korea, and others started to build their own brands based on high-quality products. I would say that apart from traditional classical brand theory, they started with the product and then with their quality, which was the basis to build their brands. Do you agree?
Well, it was more than just product quality, because by the time they started building brands, they had been contract manufacturers for other large multinationals. And so they had learned the capability of global logistics, because by virtue of the fact that you were supplying, let's say if you're LG and you were supplying GE, you had to learn the logistics to deal with GE. But you also learned a lot about customer tastes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you layered on technology. So it wasn't just product quality, it was actually delivering things to customers that were new. So let's take LG as an example. In the US, it launched in the US with the LG brand. They killed the Gold Star brand, which had entered in the early 1970s. But they launched in 2002 the LG brand. And they came with innovations. For example, some of it was quite simple, like let's say a direct drive washing machine. Now, the direct drive led to a much lower noise level, which people like, because you don't want this racket going on when the dishwasher is running, the washing machine is running. And so it wasn't just that they had good quality products, they were bringing new technology. And some of the technology was quite novel. So in 2006, LG launched the steam washing machine. Now, they were the first in the world to have a steam washing machine. It was a patented product. And they managed to grab 35% of their sales came from this one model. Okay, because it was just so revolutionary. What it allowed the consumer to do was to what they called refreshing your clothes, which means that let's say you have a silk shirt or a silk dress or alpaca overcoat that you don't want to send for dry cleaning because there are no stains, but you'd like to make it wrinkle-free and odor-free. You could just put it into the steam cycle for 20 minutes and it would come out as if it had just been dry cleaned. So this was really a major new capability that they offered the consumer that nobody had. Um, then they had a refrigerator where, although the freezer was in the bottom with a drawer, you could still dispense ice from the door.
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
this required major technological solution, although it may not seem like that, to the point that Whirlpool, to compete, launched a similar model, but they put a second compressor in the door so that they could generate the ice in the door. So the idea that the freezer section at the bottom would generate the ice and then it would be delivered at the level where you would stick in a glass and get ice from a typical refrigerator, that required an engineering solution that was not easy, and Whirlpool couldn't crack it in time to be able to compete with LG. So it wasn't just product quality. It was actually thinking about, well, I want the freezer at the bottom because obesity is a global problem. You use the freezer only 15% of the time, the refrigerator 85% of the time. So if I can stop you from having to bend, that's a real benefit, right? And now the challenge is, how do I get the ice from the door? Because you don't want to give up the ice from the door to avoid bending. And here this was a refrigerator that they sold for $3,000 and people bought it. It flew off the shelf because people said, yeah, this is what we want. So I think it was also coming up with customer solutions.
Okay. I understand. Well, talking now about as far as branding is concerned, and talking about the luxury brands, there are several luxury brands that starting to have Eastern European countries and China, for instance, producing their products. But taking into account that craftsmanship, country origin have been at least seen till this moment as a way to reinforce their value. For instance, a French product or an Italy or an American brand, just to give you some examples. Do you think it will produce negative associations from customers' perceived value?
Yes, definitely, but it requires that the customer needs to know that the item was produced in these countries. So in Europe, the best I know, the country of manufacture need not be on the label. So if I'm Armani and I produce a suit that's tailored in China, I don't need to put that this suit was tailored in China. You do in the US. And so maybe for the US market, I've manufactured the suits in Europe, but for the European market, because the legal requirement doesn't exist, I don't put the country of manufacture on the label. How do I know that my suit came from China if it doesn't say it?
Yeah. It depends on the brands. For instance, there are some brands that say, for instance, made by Armani, not made in China or made anywhere. Yeah. Okay. Well, if we take several rankings about the largest and the most valuable companies around the world, we see dramatical changes along the last 10 to 20 years. Why have those larger corporations been losing value? What shall new ventures and brands do to succeed in the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, the rankings that I've seen, basically it's been the tech companies that have run away with so, like if you go back a dozen years, there was no Facebook, no Google, no Amazon. These companies were not. It was Coca-Cola, IBM, General Electric, etc., which were the top in the top 10. But now, it's I guess Google and Apple vie for the number one position in among brands, and then Amazon is also right up there. Facebook is right up there. So it's the tech companies, and they've become gigantic because it's a winner takes all market, right? So if I ask you to name what search engines other than Google, how many would you come up with? And you'd have to think. It's not like if I say, soft drinks. You'd say, oh, there's Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, blah, 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 blah. It just comes pouring out. But you say search engine, and it's just Google that's there. If I say social media, you say Facebook or YouTube, right? Which is a Google property. So what happens is that, if I say, online purchasing, well, it's Amazon. So it just, these companies have become behemoths with trillion-dollar valuations. And so it's difficult for bricks and mortar businesses to compete, because those businesses tend not to be a winner-takes-all market. And anything that's sort of, I think, based on in the physical world, there will be a range of sources of competitive advantage, which doesn't necessarily exist in the digital world. So I think that, in terms of seeing these companies, well, there might be other companies that disrupt these behemoths. More likely, there will be legislation, just like, AT&T got broken up in the US in 1980, 79, 80, 81, whenever it was in that time frame. There's a lot of chatter, right, about breaking up the IT behemoths because they're stifling potentially competition. So my guess would be that we will see some effort to make these companies spin off different parts of the business, because otherwise their strategy has been to gobble up anybody who's likely to compete. So, if I'm Facebook, I gobble up WhatsApp because it's a potential threat, or I gobble up Instagram, and then I create, there's really no opportunity for real competition then. And so, yeah, I think the next phase, we will see likely some regulatory interventions.
Okay. Also, in the as far as branding is concerned, brands have been investing all along these years in attracting customers, in developing loyalty schemes, trying to have a long-term relationship with them. At the same time, at least most of the research come to the conclusion that customers are every time less loyal to brands. If this is real, and what we can see, what do you think brands can do?
So, I think that this is the corporates blaming consumers rather than examining themselves. I don't think that you and I just became different in the last 20 years. The reality is that they have not innovated and differentiated themselves successfully. So in the past, maybe it was okay, like, you produced a particular soap. Dove is 1/4 moisturizer. That was good enough to sell it. Yeah. Now there are many soaps with moisturizer built into it, and it's no longer particularly interesting that Dove has 1/4 moisturizer. And so I honestly think that corporates are blaming consumers for their lack of understanding of customers and delivering products. I mean, people are ferociously loyal to Apple, right? I mean, every time Apple launches a product, you hear crazy stories about somebody who lined up 4 days to buy an iPhone on the first day of its launch. I mean, look at them, look at what they're doing, look at the differentiation that they're creating. And then you see, the Apple user doesn't buy a Samsung phone or a, HTC phone or a whoever phone just because it was. So really, it's lack of working really hard to understand consumers and delivering what consumers want in a differentiated way. And if you can figure it out, and you deliver on it, you will have loyalty.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can give you a personal example. I've worked with Apple since ever, and I love Apple products. But once in my life, I don't know why, I bought a MP3 device from another country, Creative, I think it's, it's American or not. But after 1 week, I said, why the hell have I bought this? Why didn't I bought the iPod? So immediately I went to the shop and bought an iPod. But at the end of the day, okay, products were not totally the same, but well, it was cheaper, the other one, but I had to buy the iPod. Otherwise, I would feel that I wasn't, that was something was wrong. And I recently saw research from Bain and Company, and where they interviewed, well, a bunch of CMOs from countries all around the world. And they said that they 80% of them said they created great experience to their customers. But at the same time, they inquired the customers, and only 8% said that they have good extraordinary experience with their brand. So there is really a gap.
Right. So if you're inward looking and you're convinced yourself that you're doing great stuff and the consumer doesn't believe it, I mean, the fundamental truth is, if you want my money, I have to believe you. I mean, I find it fascinating that, you know, I teach a course on brand management, and in my wrap up, I say many companies will tell you that, oh, people are not loyal, there's that and the other. And if you really look deeply, you'll understand they're either not clear about who their target segment is, and therefore they don't understand exactly what their core customer group wants, or they really haven't, you know, dug into what their core customer group wants, but they're trying to sell what they're capable of making, instead of saying, okay, they want this and I'm going to create that to deliver to them. And so there's this gap. And then I make myself believe I'm working so hard, and these consumers, they've become strange. They, you know, 20 years ago, they were obedient, loyal, and now they're not. Well, the fact is, now we have a lot more choice.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, if I'm not that happy with this choice, I try something else. And the number of times you call up a salesperson and you, not a salesperson, a customer support, and you get complete bullshit. You know, they just repeat. I just bought a printer. I won't name the company, but I call up and I say, you know, I bought it online. You said I would get it on Monday. It's now Wednesday. I haven't even heard from you. I need to get work done. That's why I bought yours, not because it was a better printer, but because I could get it on Monday. And what are you going to do about it? Oh, we are very sorry, but sorry doesn't cut it. At that point, sorry is a useless thing. I mean, you could say, okay, how much cost did that you incur? Did you have to go to a copy center and waste an hour? How much does that cost? Can I give you free ink for that value or something? But no, they just repeat the thing, and finally you just hang up and you say, okay, that's the last time I'm buying your printer. Okay, I'm stuck with it for the next few years, but you know, in 3 years when I change, I will look at another brand. And they just don't get it, that telling me you're sorry isn't good enough.
Yeah, and at the end, and they still ask you at the end of the talk, even without solving your problem, and what can I help you? You didn't
That's
help
right.
me.
I'm like, you just didn't help me, so get out of my face.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Notwithstanding the evolution of technology in a totally new market environment, it looks like that apart from the new digital techniques and instruments, there is a lack. It's my perspective. I wanted to hear your opinion. There is a lack of a new marketing paradigm concerning the need for a new marketing planning process. I would say a new post-digital marketing era that will succeed. We can call it several things like marketing 5.0 or so, where technologies will be totally integrated, a new human-to-human approach, and will rule the marketing arena. What do you think? Do you agree?
I agree, and I think that some companies are trying to experiment to see how they can get there, because the old model clearly, where your cycles were, you had 1 year budgeting cycles and maybe made quarterly plans, whatever. That's all gone, and now you're, sort of constantly evolving. You're looking at data. The technologies have evolved. Like, I was I had somebody from Google last September present in my class, and this technology where if you're uh, browsing in the section for, let's say, in a sporting shop like Decathlon, if you're in the, let's say, the soccer section,
Mhm.
then they will be able to serve up a ad to you which has a soccer context. So it's a shell, and then they can populate it with different content on the fly, and then you get it. I mean, that's so first, you as a marketer now, you need to be aware of all the evolving technology, right? You never had to worry about being a tech savvy person, but now you have to be a super tech savvy person to know what to do. You need to understand analytics. What is machine learning? How does it work? How can it help me? Um, how do I analyze this, petabytes of data that are coming from the various sources? How do I use that to be able to make better decisions? So you need, um, you need a different kind of people. I mean, very often in the past, marketers have kind of said, well, I have an intuition. I mean, marketers have avoided looking at data for a very, very long time. And I think now you have data, and data gives insight. And that insight should be driving it. But now that you've got data pouring in, you need the technical capability to crunch it, to respond to it. And then you have, you know, when I arrived in the US 40 years ago, I mean, there were like 3 channels, even in the US, right? And then a few cable channels, which were still not mainstream back then. And now there's hundreds of channels. Then you have the internet and YouTube and thousands of YouTube channels. And how do you manage in that world? It requires a whole new skill set. It requires an organization that is much more agile. How do you create that agile organization? Um, how do you move away from the sort of evaluating a whole bunch of things and saying this is good, to actually on the fly experimenting, learning from the experiment, and then uh, you know kind of investing behind successes. It's a whole different mindset. It's a whole different technical capability set, and I think that organizations are experimenting with it. I haven't seen anything written at this point that says this is
Sure.
this is the new marketing department. I would actually like to um, be able to talk to companies and hopefully understand from them these kinds of things, and write about it, because I think it's just absolutely fascinating area.
So in a way, the new market will be kind of half artists and half scientists, so to speak.
It should always have been that, that's the thing. But now I think marketers are being dragged kicking and screaming into this new world, because if you don't, you'll die. So far, you could claim that I'm an artist, right? I mean, just look, any creative director in an ad agency talks about their ad as a film. They don't say I shot an ad yesterday. They'll say I shot a film yesterday. They think of themselves as if they were,
Sure.
you know, producers of film. And I just think that tells it, that says it all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the cloud, the data, and all those technologies, just to mention some of them, they produce, they allow new challenges as far as marketing and management is concerned. But having this in mind, one might conclude that the insights that are reached to, for instance, using cloud, big data, algorithms, machine learning, and so forth, we will eventually, if we deal with the same data, we eventually come to the same conclusion, so to speak. So apparently, having so many instruments and solutions, what is the role of a new marketer? Because in a way, if it's only having those conclusions and apply them directly, I don't know if they will come to the same solutions or the same insights. What do you think about this?
So first of all, I think you don't necessarily have the same data, right? I mean, unless you're buying syndicated data, but if you have data on your customer base should be pretty unique. It shouldn't be the same as, the next guy's customer base, right? And secondly, the data will show a pattern. How I interpret it is still me, right? So there might be other people poring over the same data, but they just don't see the same thing. So what do you actually see? So that transition from actually a pattern of data to an insight, that still requires human intervention. It's not that maybe in the decades to come, when we have real intelligence in machines, that's a whole different story. But then that'll beg the question, why bother about anything? Because machines are faster at things, and once they can become self-learning, we become redundant. But that's a whole different topic. But till then, I think marketers are necessary to be able to generate the insight. And then from that insight, how do you implement? Right? Because we all have certain insights and certain blinkers. And the way we implement and the way we think we can do it, and then actually being able to do it, they're all steps. And those are steps where the human is involved. And if you're better at it, then you'll win.
Yeah. But having all this in mind, what are for you the main challenges for marketing nowadays and in the future?
I think they're the same as they've always been: understanding the customer and really being able to get everybody in the organization to align behind providing the solution. It's not, see, marketing is strategy. I think that, I say, well, most companies do marketing with a small m. And they're doing marketing with a small m because it's some department tucked away somewhere, which is responsible for running advertising and this and that and the other. And that's all they do. But really, what does marketing say? I mean, the definition of marketing is to meet the needs and wants of the customer at a profit. But to meet the needs and wants of the customer at a profit requires the whole organization to dance.
Yeah.
So strategy begins with saying, what's my competitive advantage? Marketing begins with asking, what do my customers want?
Sure.
So it's a demand side view of strategy. And since In the old days, the key advantage lay in your competitive advantage. You had some technology that the other guy didn't. But the world has become flat. Everybody has the same capability, technology-wise. So what you don't have and what's constantly evolving is the customer. Because I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. And so my needs and wants today are different, not just because I'm 5 years older, but because my world has changed, because the things that I think are now possible, I didn't think were possible then. Some company has done something where I say, well, if they can deliver that service, why can't you? Right? And so we're constantly evolving. And so as a company, even if I have been the customer you're targeting, you need to constantly understand how I'm evolving. And so that's the scarce resource. It's my money. Am I going to give it to you, or am I going to give it to that other person?
Sure.
And, unlike you, I've been an Apple hater. My wife is like the Apple gal, and she has everything Apple. And I've avoided, but I'm getting seriously concerned with the privacy issues that are now there with the Android platform, with Google, and so on and so forth. And I'm saying, Apple doesn't sell my data, and maybe I should suck it up that I've been critical of Apple all these years and move to Apple because my privacy needs trump the reasons that I haven't bought Apple before, because I find that their environment is more closed than I would like it to be. So people evolve, and I've been seriously thinking about buying Apple. I mean, my wife will laugh at me if I tell her this after all the jokes I've cracked at her expense over the years. So I just think that you need to understand your customer. I'm an evolving customer. I change my mind every day because I learned something new. I never thought of privacy 5 years ago. I never realized how my data was being used and abused. And so now that I've become more conscious of that, I'm like, hey, I don't like that. And there's no way to stop it.
Yeah. But
I mean, I'd be happy to pay for Google Maps. Just don't track where I'm going. But I don't have the option. Either I pay, either I let you know that I went to X, or too bad.
Yeah. But also in my experience and in my classes, I say, what about marketing? If we see that the basics of marketing are the same as when marketing started, so to speak, understanding the customers, focusing it, and so on. But the really problem for me, as what I've seen and my experience, is that the real problem is not for marketing, it's for companies. There are lots of companies that aren't really focused on the customer. They say they are, but at the end of the day,
they're not.
And I have also experienced as CMO of a large company and marketing manager. And one of them I had to leave because really I couldn't fulfill my job because they weren't really focused on the customer. They said they were, but they weren't because it's really another issue. We didn't talk about it, but another issue which is really a problem. It's a problem for the CEOs in mainly listed companies, that they have to deal with the short-term long run because they want to get profits immediately. And sometimes they destroy customer relationships for a long time because they want results immediately.
Right. And just because you think you're customer focused doesn't make you customer focused. And, if you really, when I started teaching executives for the first time, long time ago, I used to kind of get a little bamboozled when they say, oh yeah, we're customer focused, because I said, oh shit, now what do I tell them? But then I start asking, so tell me exactly how you're customer focused. And then you start hearing what they think is customer focused. And you say, well, really? What about this? And what about that? And, some get it, and some are very resistant because it's just, too frightening to think uh, that you are not getting it, and then what's going to happen to my job, and blah blah blah. And yeah, it's just very tough.
Yeah. And also I have the experience of telling executives one simple sentence is you have to give to your customers what they want and not what do you think they want. But it's difficult for them to understand because
It is. It is. You're quite right, because they say we've been in this business 20 years. We know
yeah.
what they want. And I say, no, you don't know what they want, because you and they are not at all alike. You make $500,000, $1 million a year. You know, you jet around the world flying business class. You know, it's that person makes $50,000. They have 3 kids. They have a high school education. Their world is utterly different, and so you have no idea. And so I think that this is a real problem, because we think we know, because we've been selling X for so many years. How could we not know? Right? But you don't know.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, to end our interesting talk, and this is not a political question. Everything is political, but I understand you've been living in Singapore. What do you think were the most significant reasons why a small region like Singapore some decades ago was not really developed, and it turned to be one of the most competitive and developed regions in the world?
So are you asking me about Singapore or the region?
Not Singapore. Singapore.
Okay.
Not the
So,
region.
you know, I read a very interesting article the other day on the BBC news feed that I get on my phone, which talked about I think the title of the article was "The Asian Country Obsessed with Hygiene," something like that. And you know, I was just curious, which is this country, because I'd never really associated. So where this thing went was that in 1968, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, the founding prime minister of Singapore, uh, recognized that, you know, when he talked about cleanliness, he talked about cleanliness in its broadest sense. So it was not only that we shouldn't you know, throw stuff, litter the streets or whatever, but it was also that we shouldn't be corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea of a corruption-free government is pretty unique in this region, right? I mean, you look around and you say every one of the neighboring countries in the region has issues with corruption. Some are wildly corrupt, others are less wildly corrupt, but they're all corrupt. And so I think being a bastion of cleanliness, in the sense that, you know, the laws are transparent. You may agree or disagree with them, but they're clear. You know, I mean, if you smuggle drugs, you'll be hanged. You may disagree with that, but it's clear. And the Singapore Airlines will announce it, that there are, you know, that must tell you that there are severe penalties for drug smuggling in Singapore before the plane lands. They don't tell you you'll be hanged, but they tell you that, you know, there are severe penalties. But at the same time, like, you know, we've lived here now 16 years, and it's, I still hold just employment pass. And, you know, 6 weeks before my employment pass, which is renewed every 3 years, comes up, I get a form filled in by the HR department, which I have to sign. I sign it. They just ask me if there's anything that's changed in the form, and there's no reason for things to have changed. So then they submit it to the government. A couple of weeks later, they send back a document to HR saying, please make an appointment. HR asks me, tells me these are the appointment slots available. Which one do you want? I choose one. I go there. They take a photograph of my current look, and they give me an appointment time. I actually am seen within 5 minutes of that appointment time. So the whole process takes, in excluding going to the office and coming back, maybe 15 minutes. And you come back, and then 3 days later, the new thing appears. My HR people say it's arrived. Shall I put it in your mailbox? I say yes, and I have a new work permit. In France, I used to have to go with a big stack of documents to renew the same thing. And, it's absurd. Like every time I'd have to go with my birth certificate. And I said, I understand that I have to come with my marriage certificate because, I could get divorced. But birth certificate? And the response was, Monsieur, c'est la France. Right?
It's Europe, not only France, it's Europe.
Yeah, but it's absurd, right? You've seen my birth certificate once. If that is a genuine thing, you have it on file. Why should I have to dig it out every year, photocopy it, and go there? It's killing trees apart from anything else.
Sure.
So it's just bureaucracy that hasn't been examined since Napoleon, and the same rules are being applied. And so things don't work as well as they should. My parents were going to come visit in France, and I needed to get this letter from the government, Mary, for the High Commission or for the embassy in India to issue them a visa.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in a village called More, but Fontainebleau is the big town in the area. More has less than 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So because it was more convenient I was at INSEAD, I just went to the mairie and in Fontainebleau, and I asked them, what documents should I put together when I go to get this thing? And they gave me a printed thing, which on top of it said, Ministry of External Affairs, et cetera, official document from the Ministry of External Affairs of France, saying these are the documents I need. I put those documents together, and there was only like Tuesday, if I remember correctly, between 8 and 12 that you had to go to the mairie in the village I lived in to deal with this. So I went there with all the documents, and then they asked me, where is this? Whatever, some document, additional. So I say, but look, I have this form, the printed document from the Ministry of External Affairs, and I have everything. What do you mean you want X? But the fellow looks at me and says, Monsieur, c'est more. Like, what are you talking about? This is the French government that is going to issue a visa to my parents. And More, this pissing little village of less than 5,000, makes up its own rules for what documents you need to produce that. I mean, how insane is that?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I mean, it's efficient. It's safe. Like, I don't have a daughter, but if I had a daughter, I wouldn't mind my 10-year-old daughter hopping a taxi at 8 p.m. to go visit a friend, because it's just so super safe. So it's safe, it's clean, physically clean. Things work smoothly. There's no, I mean, yeah, it's just an easy place to live. And so naturally, people live here. I mean, when we were setting up our campus in Asia, we looked at other places in Asia. I mean, it wasn't like we said, Singapore. And we said, well, where would we be able to attract faculty from around the world? Because students would come. I mean, if we had a campus in Shanghai or Bangkok or Jakarta, we would still have had the students coming. But faculty might say, look, we don't want to live there because it's not as straightforward as living in Singapore. And so I think that that makes a big difference. They plan ahead. By the time they're opening a current terminal at Changi Airport, they've got the next 2 terminals in the works because they have anticipated that, by, let's say, 2025, the traffic would have increased to X, and we need another terminal, and that the construction on the terminal might have already begun, because before the capacity of this one is reached, whereas in other countries, you play catch up. Like, okay, now the damn thing is bursting at the seams. So now let's build another terminal. And by the time that new terminal is built, your demand, you can barely manage with the new terminal. So whereas here, there's always slack built in so that people have a good experience. And I think that sort of this far-sighted planning, combined with sort of clear rules and a clean administration, makes this a very successful location for people to come and invest their money. And it's simple to do business.
So summarizing, it's clean, safe, efficient, simple, transparent, planning activity or planning mindset, and corruption free, which is really, you start with one of the most important, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Professor, that's it. Thank you very much for your time.